So I went up to the archive, checked around, and saw that we had written only in passing about the Bakersfield Sound. So I went absolutely stark raving mad.
You just heard Robert Price. In today's show, Bob and I discuss his years that he has spent writing and learning about Kern County through his time with the Bakersfield Californian and now through a couple of local news outlets, including KGET. We talk about his recent research and ongoing research on fentanyl here in Kern County and the facts and stories surrounding a story that he published a few years ago that continues to have new facts pop up, the Lords of Bakersfield. We also talk about Buck Owens' ex-wives, and talk about some of Bob's favorite stories over the 3 decades that he's been serving the community.
Welcome back to the Our 2 Cents podcast, the show where your local professionals sit down with an array of guests to hear their story and impart some wisdom for both business and life-improving skills. This is your place to hear business and community leaders discuss relevant topics that matter to you.
Before we get into our episode, I'd like to ask everyone to head over to our website at our2centspodcast.com. There you can learn about the hosts, get more information about the guests, also sign up to be a guest, and then we have a newsletter that you can sign up for, which is sent out once a month, and that newsletter covers everything that you may have missed in the previous month, the activities and episodes that we've had over here. Also, invite you to go to Instagram. The handle at Instagram for Our 2 Cents is Our 2 Cents Podcasts, plural. And there you can also get the latest updates and catch the new releases. Today on the show, we have Robert Price with us. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So if people don't know who you are, what is the most memorable connection that you would have to Bakersfield?
The most memorable connection would be the fact that I've just been here. I've just been present for, over 30 years as the newspaper columnist, and the last couple of years television reporter, and still writing a newspaper column. So I'm just like, you can't get away from me. Now I'm on a podcast.
Right.
If I can get a feature film made about my life, and I'll have it all covered.
And so now you're with KGET, is that right?
I am with KGET.
Okay, cool. Can you give us a little history on how long you were at each role? You're still writing. Is writing your heart, or are you enjoying the TV?
Can I say yes to both?
You can say no to both, too.
No, I mean, writing is my heart. I love writing. I love telling stories, and television is just another way to tell a story. I'm still writing stories, but I'm also, standing up in front of a camera and have been enjoying that. As long as it's recorded and I can do a second take and a third and a fourth take and on occasion a 30th take.
Right.
Live TV is a whole nother thing.
At the fairgrounds.
That's an adventure. Yeah.
How hard of it is a transition though? I mean, it's kind of like radio to movies, right? Like you have a face for radio or whatever. But I mean, moving from the newspaper and being behind the scenes to a much more forward-facing role, how do you like it? I like it. When I was hired at KGET, it was my understanding, or at least it was my boss's understanding, that I would be kind of a behind the camera guy. I would be I would be doing what I did at the newspaper, which is writing. And then, because it is television, I would go on the air every once in a while to say, hey, I've got a story on the website. Right. Check
out my story on the website. And that would be it. And I'd get off the camera. But my very first day, I went out and did a television story, a television package. And I just kept doing it. And after a while, they realized, first of all, he's not as bad as we thought he would be.
Right.
He's not pretty, but we don't care. We had enough pretty people. When I walked in there were like 5 25-year-old former prom queens.
Right.
Yeah, these beautiful women who were like the valedictorian of their class. I mean, they were brilliant and had everything. And then I walk in, Grandpa walks in.
Oh, you're rugged. It's a look.
But rugged. You like that? Okay. All right. Well, let's go with rugged. It's clicked. It's been okay.
Well, because now you're actually even doing commercials, right? I mean, not commercials, but for the news, you did a dog giveaway.
I did
ad.
a dog. Yeah.
I laughed every single time the dog jumped out of your hands. Anyways, okay. So I would love to explore a little bit of your Californian days, just the stories that you've covered. And then I also want to talk about a couple of things that you've really been focused on with KGET. Which do you want to start with?
Well, I guess I can start with the beginning of when I first came to Bakersfield.
Yeah.
Well, I had been a sports editor. I was a sports editor up in Turlock, and then I was the sports editor of the Anaheim Bulletin, and I was a sports guy. And I came here as a sports guy, actually as a page designer, and started writing sports. I covered Cal State basketball the year they went 33-0.
What year is this?
This would have been 92, 93.
Okay.
When they won the national championship in Division II. And then I went on and started writing business. I basically had every job in the place, including I was an entertainment writer in 1997, right?
Okay.
And I had heard about this Bakersfield Sound thing. I wasn't sure.
Right.
I wasn't sure what it was. I had heard the name Buck Owens. I'd heard the name Merle Haggard. I remember hearing Tiger by the Tail, when I was a little kid. And that was the extent of my knowledge. And I asked the editor, hey, have we ever written anything about the Bakersfield Sound? And he goes, well, I don't know. And there was this other entertainment writer in the room. That was back when the Californian actually had more than one entertainment writer. And he said, of course we have. And I said, oh, okay. But I didn't believe him. So I went up to the archive, checked around, and saw that we had written only in passing about the Bakersfield Sound. So I went absolutely stark raving mad.
Wrote a book.
Right. Basically, it turned into a book. It was 4 consecutive Sundays in 1997. And then sometime later, I realized, I've already got like half a book just based on what I've already written. And about 5 years ago, it did turn into a book, which has been, relatively well received. I made no money on it whatsoever.
I still have a copy.
Do you? Good. Have you read it?
No.
Oh, my gosh.
Why did I even lead into that?
Yeah, you set yourself up. You knew what was coming. As soon as it escaped your lips, you knew, uh-oh. Yeah, right. I'm in trouble. I also wrote a column over the years, and then maybe one of the things I may be best known for is the Lords of Bakersfield.
Right. In
2003, actually in September of 2002, Assistant District Attorney Stephen Towser was murdered. And it became evident, people were talking anyway, that his case had some similarities to some other cases that had happened previously. Steve Towser had befriended a young man. I think he'd known him probably most of his life. As it turned out, the young man's father killed Towser. But this Lords of Bakersfield thing was gargantuan, and it involved older men befriending, these are quote marks that I'm using on the podcast, befriending much younger men, teenage boys, and in some cases, young men of age, but very young. And inevitably, someone would get murdered. Normally, it was the older man, but there were some cases where some younger people were also killed. Anyway, it became this sensation. I was interviewed by CNN, and I had documentary filmmakers coming up to town wanting to see what we could work out, and nothing really, came of it.
If I could add one piece on the other side of this, when this all evolved, 2003-ish, I was working with the sheriff's department as a deputy working the infirmary, and it became my responsibility to watch over the accused murderer of Towser. And we had he was very open and forthcoming and opinionated, and it was wild. It was really, really wild to have that experience with him for like 6 months every day.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. He was quite a talker. He knew what he had done. He was not proud of it, but he felt impassioned by the situation with his son, Lance. And it was, the time that you're talking about was sensationalized a lot.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. And it's come back around. I kind of set that part of my life aside, but then Robert Mistrial, who was a murderer in one of those cases, probably the most prominent case of the personnel director, the county's personnel director, Ed Buck, who was murdered in 1981. He got out of prison, and I'd had a little bit of contact with him while he was in prison, but he got out of prison a couple years ago, and I did a story, kind of an update on his situation, and now it's in the news very currently. He is suing the county of Kern, the city of Bakersfield, Catholic Charities of the Diocese of Fresno. So it's back in the news, and in fact, I just had a story last night. I'm dating this podcast, but I like a 6-minute story, which is unheard of, by the way. Nobody does 6-minute stories unless we're talking about Dateline. So anyway, the Lords are back in the news, like it or not.
Interesting. Well, it's really interesting. So
other than that, I've written a column. I started writing a column for the Californian in 1999, and I have continued nonstop, like 22 years I've been writing a column. It was 3 times a week when I was at the Californian. Since I've been at KGET, it's been just on Sundays. But I feel like I've kind of hit a stride where I've been able to tell some pretty good stories just in the last couple of years. With
only doing one article a week, do you feel like you're more choosy on the topics that you write on, or how do you decide what stories you're going to cover?
It's actually the opposite. I'm so busy during the week. I'm working too much. They're working me at KGET, and I'm so busy that a lot of time I don't have time to, invest in finding stories. So they usually come to me. Once in a while, I'll get so irritated by something that I'll just go off.
Pursue, yeah.
Get myself in trouble. But normally it's stories that come to me. People will suggest something, and just the most recent one on a dust bowler who passed away at the age of 91. She had a fascinating story, and I was able to tell her story most recently. So anybody out there who has a story idea, hit me up.
Yeah, definitely. Your biggest story that you've been unfolding on KGET, do you want to talk a little about that?
Yeah. A while back, I realized that a lot of people were dying of fentanyl overdoses or fentanyl poisoning. Fentanyl being a illicitly manufactured opioid. There are legitimate uses for fentanyl. Battlefield wounds, advanced cancer. This is a painkiller for people who are dying, who are in incredible pain. and it's effective. But the most minuscule amount of it can be fatal. And of course, in a pharmaceutical setting, they know how to administer it in such a way that you're not going to die from it. But you put it in the hands of the Medellin cartel or the Mexican mafia, and the portioning is inexact. And so as a result, we have people who think they're taking Xanax or they think they're taking OxyContin or something like that. They're taking an illicit counterfeit, and the measuring might be off, and people are dying left and right.
I'm really curious. I've been following the story on the different segments that you've been doing. It seems, I mean, maybe this is just obvious, but it seems like if such a little amount will benefit you or give you a high or whatever, why are they using so much of it per pill? Or, I mean, I understand the lack of regulation, but it still seems like a money waster for the mafia or whoever to put so much in each pill that it's deadly.
You're killing your customers.
Right.
Yeah. I ran across a how to make fentanyl pills online.
Nice. Okay.
And and the guy's, laying out all the details. He says, but be careful because you'll kill your customers. And, that's, he was being very honest anyway. I don't know. I mean, you want it to be strong enough so that the high is a good high and they'll come back. And I guess, they're able to do that in most cases.
So there's no accident that people are using fentanyl to lace different pills?
Well, in a sense, there is an accident. There's a lot of people who think they're really taking the real pharmaceutical pill. They think they're really taking Percocet or Xanax or whatever.
Because the manufacturers of these fake pills are doing, like every pill that I've taken, they have like stamps on them.
Yeah.
And is that all?
They're stamping those pills. They'll make them blue and stamp 30 on them. And I think that's a counterfeit OxyContin or something. I can't remember. But yeah, they'll disguise them to look exactly like the pharmaceutical version. A lot of time people die and never having known that they've taken fentanyl. I think people do know in many cases, though, these days that they are taking fentanyl and they're willing to risk it. And fentanyl is turning up in not just the opioid family. It's a replacement many times for like heroin, and OxyContin is a opioid. It's showing up outside the opioid family. It's showing up in meth. It's showing up in cocaine. It's showing up in ecstasy. I had the opportunity to, there's a test strip you can actually get. It's like a pool pH checker.
Sure. Right.
You can put it in your drugs and it'll tell you if there's fentanyl in the drug. And I had an opportunity to watch a meth user, a meth addict, test his meth, and it came back positive with fentanyl in it. And so we asked him, so are you still going to take it? And he's like, yeah, I'm still going to take it. I'm just going to make sure I have some Narcan, which has saved many lives. It's like a reversal antidote thing. And I'll make sure that my buddy is with me so if he can administer the Narcan when I
This is
pass
nuts.
out. It's nuts. It's nuts. But that's the power of drugs. That's the power of addiction. It's just so powerful that I'll risk my life to get high.
Testing sticks that you just talked about, are those widely available? I mean, is this a common part of the drug process that people are going through?
Yeah, I don't know how common it is. I guess? I don't know if you can pick it up in the pharmacy. You should be able to. I mean, you can get Narcan at the pharmacy. I don't know about those test strips. I think law enforcement has them. I think some in some healthcare environments, social workers, I think they have it, but it should be more widely available.
How prevalent are you finding it?
Well, we've got the scanner on in the office at KGET. There's a traffic accident here, and you know how scanners work, and just about once a day we'll hear possible fentanyl overdose.
Wow.
It's some days we've heard 2 or 3. We might go a day or 2 without hearing, and then like say 3 people have died from fentanyl. I think last year we had 125 people die from fentanyl poisoning, either fentanyl in its pure form or in combination with some other drug. And this year, I think we're probably by now already up to the same number, 125. We're on track for 160 fentanyl deaths in Kern County this year. So anyway, I did a 5-part series back in June, and it's actually been pretty widely seen. I've heard they're showing it in schools. I talked to a substitute teacher the other day who knows of a 18-year-old that died from a fentanyl overdose. Before she teaches whatever the class is she's substituting for, she'll talk about fentanyl, and she'll ask the kids if they know about it. And several times she's had kids say, there was that thing on Channel 17 that my parents made me watch.
Oh, excellent.
So I mean, that's awesome. That's exactly what I would want to see happen.
If somebody hasn't seen it, where could they find it?
It is on our website, kgt.com/fentanyl.
I'll also add it here in the episode notes for the podcast.
Great.
And you've been covering that for how long?
Well, I did the series. I started working on the series in January of this year, January or February. It actually finally aired June 7th, I believe.
And all 5 series, they kicked off at that point, or were they?
It was one a day for that entire week, for the entire weekdays.
Well, I'll definitely make sure that's in the episode notes so I can show my own kids and people can share it as well.
Yeah. And, I've got 2 kids myself, 26 and 28 or something like that. And
Wow.
I know, how does this happen? And I definitely, in my heart, believe they're not the types to experiment. Experiment is a stupid word, but to use drugs. But just the same, you don't know. You just don't know. There have been so many cases where the parent says, I had no idea. I had no idea. My kid was a straight A student. I had no idea. I've sat down with them. They're adults. And I say, just so you know, I don't think you're going to do this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. And I think that's something
just to pass the message on, to continue to pass it. Sure.
Exactly. And another thing people can do is if they've got leftover OxyContin from maybe they had oral surgery or something like that, and they're not using it anymore, dump it. Get rid of it. I am told you can flush it down the toilet. I had also heard that you shouldn't because it can get in the water system. I don't know, but I'm most recently told that you can just dump it if you're not in pain anymore.
The garbage disposal.
That'll work.
Do you have any more of the series? Are you done with the series until there's an obvious reason to kick it back off?
I'm done with the series, but I'm not done with the series. Even in the short few days between the time that it was completed and ready to air and when it actually did air, there was about a week in there in between. I was doing stories on fentanyl deaths even then because they just continued to come along.
It's obviously not just a Kern County problem, but do you have any information on how it's maybe throughout California or the states at all?
Well, as bad as it is in Kern County, it's much worse in many other places. The Northeast, New England, New York, it's, epidemic. Wow, and San Francisco, I want to say, had 700 fentanyl deaths last year. Completely, epidemic there as well. I guess we can be grateful that it's not worse than it is, as bad as it is.
Can you talk a little bit more about The Sound of Bakersfield? The book that you wrote, you already addressed, but do you see that continuing to build? Can you explain Bakersfield Sound, generally speaking?
Yeah, well, I get this question a lot. And to me, the Bakersfield Sound is not really a sound at all, really. I mean, when we think of the Bakersfield Sound, we think of Buck Owens, who kind of had this sort of rockabilly thing going on. And then we think of Merle Haggard, who was influenced by Bob Wills, who was Western Swing. And his guitar player, Roy Nichols, was influenced by Django Reinhardt, who was a jazz guitar player. So you've got the two main practitioners of the Bakersfield Sound. One of them is rockabilly with a little bit of Mexican field music thrown in, and the other one is sort of a jazz Western swing guy. Those are two different kinds of music.
Sure.
And there's some overlap, and they might play the same songs once in a while. But to me, the Bakersfield Sound was a time and a place. It's not a sound per se. And because it's a time and a place, I mean, we can recreate the place. We're still here, but we can't recreate the time. The Bakersfield Sound sort of faded, probably about the time Don Rich was killed in a motorcycle accident. That's Buck Owens' lead guitar player. And that affected Buck so much. It was sort of the end of his hit-making days. Merle lasted a little bit longer. From about 1950 until about 1975, that was your Bakersfield Sound time. And we continue to celebrate it as we should. I think it's got some potential as a kind of a tourist attraction.
Sure.
New Orleans has jazz, and Memphis has blues, and Nashville has homogenized country, and Bakersfield has something to celebrate here, and I think we should continue to celebrate it. But, it's really hard to find that type of sound anywhere, including in Bakersfield. I think there are some people will argue with me, and I'm behind them all the way. I hope. I mean, there are some good musicians here.
Sure.
There really are. I hope we can continue to push towards that goal that we had.
My grandparents told me this a long time ago, and I can't remember. It was my grandmother's style of gossiping, and I don't know who was which, but Merle Haggard and Buck Owens shared a wife, right? Not at the same time, but one of them lost the wife in a divorce, and the other one gained the wife.
Yeah.
Who was who?
Well, Bonnie Owens is the person we're talking about.
Okay.
And Bonnie, she lived in rural Arizona near Phoenix. I'm trying to think of the name of the town. Anyway, she knew Buck as they were teenagers. And I think the baby came first.
Oh, no.
And then, as happens often, and then that would have been Buddy. And then then they got married. And they were like 19, 20, 21 years old, and it got a little volatile. And anyway, she packed up, she took the baby, and she moved to Bakersfield because she had an aunt here. And Buck was somewhat familiar with Bakersfield because he was picking oranges all over the place, and I think he probably knew about Bakersfield. But in 1951, I believe it was, he followed Bonnie out here.
Which is why Buddy still lives there. The family kind of started there. Okay.
Right.
Okay, sure.
And so he got a job at the Blackboard playing guitar with Bill Wood's band. But then the divorce came along, I think, in the pretty early 50s. Much, much later, Bonnie meets Merle Haggard. I want to say it was probably about Well, he was out of prison, just out of prison. Probably 62, 63 is when she met him. They both played in the bands at the Lucky Spot and the Clover Club. And she was probably 7 years older than Merle, but they got married. And then you had the strange situation of Merle Haggard being the stepfather right. of Buck Owens' two sons, Buddy and Mike. But then that marriage, lasted, I think, maybe only just a few years.
Oh, okay.
And, Merle had a few of those. And so did Buck, for that matter. I guess that's something stardom just does.
This is not the direction I wanted to go, but you just also said something. Who was in prison? Merle Haggard was in prison?
Merle Haggard was in prison. Yeah, he had a tendency as a teenager to do bad stuff. He would do burglaries. I think there were a couple of maybe assaults in there. And he was a kind of a messed up kid. And not only would he pull this stuff, but once he's in juvenile hall or wherever, he would escape. He escaped about 6 times. And finally, he comes before the judge in 1957, maybe? I can't remember. 57, 58. And the judge looks at his rap sheet and says, we got to put you someplace that you can't escape from. And so he went to San Quentin. But then he was actually given the opportunity. Some other inmates were planning an escape. And they said, do you want to get in on this? And maybe the first, intelligent thought he ever had in his head was no.
From San Quentin, no less.
From San Quentin, yeah. And those guys, I think, they all got caught. And I think 1 or 2 of them may have gotten killed. So it was a smart move on his part. And I think right around that time, he also befriended Carl Chessman, who was known as the Red Light Killer or something like that. It was the red light something. In L.A., he would abduct, rape, and I don't think he actually killed anybody, but he was a rapist. Back in those days, that crime would get you a capital punishment. And he befriended Chessman, and then he watched Chessman take the long walk down to the execution chamber. And it was at that point where he realized, that's it for me. I'm cleaning up my act. So he got out after, it was a little less than 3 years, kicked around in Bakersfield, and, met the right people.
Met Bonnie?
Eventually met Bonnie. Actually, he met Fuzzy Owen, who became his manager, a bandmate, and Fuzzy Owen was also with his cousin. They owned the Tally Records, and so Merle signed to Tally Records. Bonnie Owens was Fuzzy Owen's girlfriend, and Merle took it from Fuzzy, his best friend, took Bonnie from. There's a third party in there that's not quite as famous, but.
Bonnie sounds like a fun woman.
You know what? I had a chance to meet Bonnie, and she was as sweet as she could be.
Really?
She was really, really nice.
Oh, that's awesome. You do what you got to do, I guess.
Yeah. Love does things to people,
Yeah, right. Makes you stupid.
Anyway. We agree on that, don't we?
In all of your years with the Californian, I don't want to say the most gruesome, or what was the most shocking story that you wrote about?
Well, the Lords of Bakersfield murder comes to mind.
Pretty bad, yeah.
Yeah. And I just did this story, just aired last night again. Time dated our conversation again. But Bobby Mistrial and this other young gentleman, Roy Kamenish, Bobby and his victim drove out Glenville Road. Roy Kamenish followed him. At a certain point in the dark road, he pulled over. Kamenish pulls in front of him, walks back to the car where Buck is sitting in the passenger seat, and with a knife and a hammer takes care of him. And that's gruesome. That's gruesome. Yeah. That's it's hard to top that one. But nothing comes to mind that tops that.
It's pretty untoppable. Okay.
Another I've got I guess it's kind of hard to pin me down. I've written a book on country music. I have this Lords of Bakersfield crime drama, basically. But I also like to write humor if I can. And once in a while, I think I'm able to pull that off. That's a hard thing to pull off sometimes.
Where do you work? In the newspaper?
Usually in the newspaper. But now at the TV station, I have something called Where We Live. It's like an occasional feature where I'll just do, lighter stories on people and places and things about Bakersfield to kind of make us distinctive and bring personalities out. And I enjoy doing that too. And I don't know how that fits in with my...
A few months ago, I remember on Facebook, somebody was squealing and screaming about you. Names are not relevant to give it more...
Was it good screams or not good screams?
No, it was irate.
Bad screams. Okay.
Yeah, right. And I went back to the article to see what she was screaming about, and you had pulled a funny. I'm pretty sure you meant to be funny, but it was a very dark funny. And so I don't know if you were meant to be funny in this particular situation, but I know you can really piss people off very, very easily.
I think all of us basically, I don't know, all of us do, but many of us want to be liked. We want we want everybody to be happy all around us. And I do too. But I reached a point where I realized you can't say anything important if you're always just trying to be nice to people. And so I, on occasion have told it the way I think it is. And I realized that for the most part, people appreciate it. I wrote something for the Californian for probably 5 years called Sound Off. It was
I remember.
Saturday morning where people would write in to praise the newspaper, criticize the paper, complain about all sorts of different things. And many times they were correct and many times they were not. And I realized, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. If you're way off base, I'm going to tell you why I think you're way off base. And it might be the most popular thing I think I've ever written, just because I guess I had a way with sarcasm. And so, at some point in my career, I'm not sure when it was, I realized, tell the truth, people will appreciate the truth.
With newspaper, I've been curious. In high school, I was obsessed with newspaper. I was editor-in-chief of the paper. I was obsessed. And it's something that I kind of pay attention to, the printing versus the digital. How much has that affected the readability or the readership of the Californian?
The fact that you can read the newspaper online?
Right. You have to pay for, edition at the market or wherever. And then everything is widely available online. How is that affecting it?
Well, that's been one of the greatest challenges of journalism over the last 10 years. At some point, and maybe I guess it was 20 years ago, newspapers said, okay, we've got this platform now, we have this resource. Do we charge for it or not? And it was just sort of a universal decision to not charge for it. And all of a sudden, newspaper subscriptions dropped, advertising revenue dropped, and the industry realized, oops, we made a big mistake. So then newspapers, including the Californian at one time, introduced paywalls.
Right.
You got to pay a certain amount of money to be able to read it.
So annoying. You can read the first 3 sentences and then something would pop.
Oh, you hate it. You hate it. But I think the industry has, to a pretty good extent, recovered. Right now I subscribe to the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times. I have to subscribe to other newspapers. I'm paying out the nose for newspaper subscriptions. It's like if you want the news, you got to pay. If you want to really know what's going on in the world, and it's worth it to me. The downside is that local newspapers like the Californian have suffered. Smaller newspapers where you've got a much smaller potential pool of readers, and face it, Bakersfield is not one of the more,
you can say it,
intellectual. We've got a high literacy rate, a large number of non-English speakers. And so the pool of, it tends to be college educated people, not completely, that read newspapers. And the pool here is not huge. And so I think it's been challenging for newspapers like the Californian. And there's been some, legislation to try and give tax breaks or different things to smaller newspapers to encourage local news, because the LA Times is not going to do a story on a new sushi restaurant that opened in Bakersfield. Right. The Californian will. The LA Times.
What about ads? Are ads not enough? Ads seem enough for television, et cetera, but ads are not a big ticker? Well,
ads are traditionally what pays the salaries at newspapers. Traditionally, the subscription that you pay, that pays for just the production and delivery of the newspaper. It doesn't pay for the journalism. Okay. So you need advertising to pay for the journalism. If the circulation numbers are dropping, and as they have been with many local newspapers, then the advertising rates are going to drop, and it's going to become a less attractive buy. So that's something else that newspapers have struggled with, that I'm hoping.
I think about all the people that I know that are aware of the Californian and tap into it. And my grandfather, who passed about 1.5 years ago, was the last person I knew that was having it delivered every day. And his vision was just about gone. I showed him how to log online and, change the size of the print on the screen and blow it up. And he still insisted on that paper, the piece of paper in front of him. And he would have 2 magnifying glasses to actually read it. He was so determined to keep that habit going. I would imagine that that's pretty much your slice of printable readers right now, is the older generation that's used to the print and doesn't want to change to digital.
Yeah, I can still remember we had a webcast at the Californian for a while, and we would bring in high school athletes, and I remember somebody set in front of a high school athlete a newspaper that had his picture in it, and he looked like it was from outer space. He had no idea. He was like the first time he'd ever seen it. Yeah, that's the other big change that's going on, is that if you're under 40, and for sure if you're under 20, you are completely digital. That phone is everything. And people just don't want to mess with newspapers. If you're of a certain age on the other end of the spectrum, you have to have that tactile thing. Right. And you've got to have your coffee. You got to spread out the newspaper across the kitchen table.
It's a thing. Yeah.
It's a thing. It's a thing. When we're losing that, I don't know if it's good or bad. It just, that's the way.
Different. Yeah.
That's how it works.
Can you give me a little bit of history on the Californian? I mean, you were there long enough and are there still, but you started long enough. It just recently went through a transition of ownership. Is that right? I mean, what does that mean to buy a newspaper and who bought it?
Well, I started in 1988, and when I started, the third floor of that great big building, that beautiful building in downtown Bakersfield, was packed. There were times where you couldn't even get a desk. You know, if you weren't a more established reporter, you had to wait for somebody to leave so you could, so there were like 100 people up there, 125 people maybe at the most.
I've been up there. It's a big space, but it's not a massive space.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. You know, we had a book editor. We had all these, little niche editors and niche reporters. Gradually over time, as this change started taking place, fewer and fewer people. It was owned by the Fritz family. Alfred Harrell actually was the guy who bought it. He bought it in 1897, I believe. Wow. And if you live in Bakersfield, you're familiar with Alfred Harrell Highway. That might be your only connection to Alfred Harrell. His great-granddaughter, I think that's right, is Ginger Morehouse of the Fritz family. She was Ginger Fritz. And she came to Bakersfield in about 1990 and determinedly held on to the paper even as things were...
The writing was on the wall, yeah.
The writing was on the wall, and she was getting some offers. That maybe in retrospect she wishes, I don't want to speak for her, but she held on to the newspaper until a couple years ago, or maybe 3 years ago, when a company out of, they've got some folks in Illinois, and they have some folks in British Columbia. So I don't know where they're based, but they bought the Californian, and there have been some challenges. I think ideally you have local ownership.
Right. That's what I was going to ask. I mean, how do they know how to come into Bakersfield or approach, and how much have they leaned on the staff that was already there?
They've totally leaned on the staff, which is wise, which is the right thing to do.
Right.
Lean on the people who know the community. They deal with the financials, and that's probably the best way to do it. But, it still is a completely local newspaper written by people who live in this community.
And so that's, the history of it, and for your career as well. So how old are you?
I'm 60. How old do you think I am?
40.
Yeah.
Same age as me, man.
Yeah, exactly. I'll tell you later.
Okay. Well, with that being said, what do the next 10 or 20 years look like for you in journalism?
I like what I'm doing. There are times when I wish I could go to a desert island or something like that and just call it good. But I like what I'm doing. I'm enjoying what I'm doing. I'm working a little bit too much. I'm working a little too many hours. So I would like to see that kind of cut back a little bit. But
is that from your doing, or?
It's from my doing. I mean, if I were to give up the column, my life would be a lot easier, but I would miss that. And then I'm also not very good at saying no. At the end of the day, the work day at KGET, something will come along and I'm supposed to be off here in a half hour, but instead I'll go off and go do this story and end up working 12 hours or something like that. So I got to stop doing that. But I enjoy the work. I enjoy telling stories, and I don't see any reason to stop. I think I've got 10 more years in me probably.
Mm-hmm. You look like it.
I look like it. Okay. All right.
You could go another 20 probably.
20. Okay. All right.
I'm just kidding.
This show has been brought to you by the Law Office of Kyle Jones, Troy Burden with the Lynn Company, CPA John Duffield, Scott Hansen, real estate lender, broker, and investor, and Eckroth, LLC, a sales and marketing agency. You've been listening to the Our 2 Cents podcast. Check out the show notes for links and more information about the show. Also visit our website at our2centspodcast.com or check us on Instagram at Our 2 Cents Podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe.